Damn it. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and Rob Mason, mayor of the small Midwestern town of Blandings Crossings, was angry with his wife Clarissa again. He had insinuated more than once that it was unseemly for her, as the town's first lady, to keep partying and partying just about every night of the damn week. She grinned in his face and replied, "First Lady Rob, don't make me laugh. You're the two-faced mayor of a two-faced town, so get serious. No one cares what I do." She said the next part of her words under her breath, probably hoping Rob wouldn't hear her, but he did. When she said, "Nobody cares what I do or who I do it with," Rob was floored by it and realized he was going to get back at her one way or another. He turned to her and said, "Actions have consequences, Clarissa." He would also get revenge on that asshole Harvey Clinker, owner of Harvey's Tavern in downtown Blandings Crossings, and a bastard who, Rob was sure, using old British Navy expressions that Rob had picked up when he was in the U.S. Navy in British Devonport, would strip her mustache or give her a good serving. Back then they had seemed quaint and quite amusing. And now? Now, perhaps not so funny and no longer so quirky. At first, Rob had been something of an agnostic when it came to the coronavirus. He doubted it was as serious as some people said, but was watching the news from Italy, poor Italy where they'd honeymooned 2 decades ago, with growing horror when he realized he could tweak the situation to his advantage and really mess with Clarissa and Harvey, and without any repercussions for himself. Moreover, if he played it right, he would look like a hero, not a villain. He received an official notice from the governor of the state, which contained the following order. Prohibited activities. All public and private gatherings of any number of people occurring outside of a single household or dwelling unit are prohibited except for the limited purposes authorized by this executive order. Under current CDC guidelines, any assembly of more than 10 people is prohibited unless excluded by this ordinance. Nothing in this ordinance prohibits gatherings of members of a household or residence. All places of public amusement, both indoor and outdoor, including but not limited to places with amusement rides, carnivals, amusement parks, water parks, aquariums, zoos, museums, arcades, fairs, children's play centers, playgrounds, theme parks, bowling alleys, movie theaters and other theaters, concert and music halls and country clubs, bars, or social clubs shall be closed to the public. He was particularly interested in the second paragraph. He'd heard that Harvey liked to lure Clarissa into his tavern and then take her to his sleazy apartment and have sex with her for the amusement of the regulars who stayed at the bar, sipping beer and cheering the unfaithful couple on. Rob called the small town's police chief into his mayor's office. "Sit down, please, Tony." Chief Tony Draper sat down and waited for the mayor to speak. He obviously had something on his mind. "You saw the latest orders from the governor's office about the COVID-19 coronavirus. I was skeptical of the virus at first, but recent reports from Italy and other countries in Europe have made me think twice. I believe we need to make sure that Blandings Crossings is constantly monitoring this. We need to ensure that there is zero tolerance for any jerks who try to break the blockchain. A friend of mine in the UK sent me a Facebook message the other day. Apparently, a police patrol found some idiots having a barbecue outside an apartment building, and when they refused to disperse, the cops knocked over the barbecue. We need to be just as hard and tough, if not more. I want you to step up your patrols as much as you can and make sure that anyone caught at that barbecue is treated as tough as possible. All pubs, bars, taverns, and entertainment venues in town that break the law must be punished to the fullest extent of the law, whoever they are." Tony nodded. "Anyone or any place you have in mind in particular?" Rob gave the impression of a man who was deep in thought. "Well, there's an amusement hall on the avenue, but under the new owners, they seem to have picked themselves up. After thinking about it, I figured the only place you might have trouble is Harvey's Tavern on Cook Street. That guy seems to be constantly pushing the boundaries, trying to trip up the police and the authorities." Tony cast a hard, searching look at him. "Of course it's a case, Mayor. You're right about Harvey Clinker. His father, who opened this place in the 1950s as an Italian restaurant, was a very different man. He always kept it neat and respectable. If his oldest son, Alfonso, hadn't died over there in Vietnam, Alfonso would be running the place, not that little waster Harvey. Oh, well, it's all in the past now, but I'll make sure we keep an eye on Harvey and his tavern. The tavern was originally an upscale Italian restaurant and modest inn run by Mario Bastini, who came from the old country in the early 1950s. After his father died, Guido Bastini decided to change his name to a more Americanized one. For some reason, no one has ever figured out he chose Harvey Clinker, and reopened Mario's as Harvey's Tavern, closing the hotel rooms because he was too lazy to serve them. The Italian cuisine was replaced with standard bar junk. And I want to make sure that anyone found there gets the full extent of the law, Tony. Anyone, the mayor added firmly. Tony nodded and stood up. Okay, Mayor, I will. He guessed what kind of game the mayor was up to, since rumors had reached him about what the mayor's pretty but rather vacuous wife was up to with Harvey Clinker. He guessed that Clinker was still angry that Rob had honestly won Clarissa's heart back in high school, and that all these years later he was trying to get back at Rob. Even though they lived in a small town and despite his wife's obvious disdain, being mayor was prestigious, and Harvey ran a battered and run-down tavern that had seen its glory days in the 1960s and 70s under his father, and Harvey was the kind of guy who was willing to cut off his nose to spite his face. A few times, for old time's sake, Tony had allowed some infractions at the tavern. He was beginning to wish he hadn't. The extra patrols had worked because the mayor's office and the police department had issued a joint statement of warning, and everyone in town had taken it seriously. Everyone except Harvey Clinker, of course, and a few hardened drunks who considered his tavern a second home. Why did Harvey Clinker act like that? Because Harvey Clinker was a weird dude. It was like he thought his secretions carried no olfactory load. Apparently, he decided that he would keep his bar open using the lock-in technique, where certain people are invited into the tavern and locked inside the room, safe, at least theoretically, from prying eyes. Clarissa had prepared several excuses for Rob to explain her absence from the house, but to her relief, he never asked her any questions. Her relief was misplaced, because if she had been capable of rational thought, her rational thought processes, even at the best of times not of high quality, were dulled by the psychological state of novel fog. She would have realized that the reason Rob didn't ask her for excuses or reasons for her absence, during the lockdown for heaven's sake, was that he didn't care at all where she went, or with whom. After a few days of patrolling and issuing minor fines to people wandering the streets without good reason or excuse, the police got a big score when they discovered a rather large crowd of people hiding out in Harvey's tavern. At first, Harvey Clinker tried to fight off the two patrolmen who had raided the place, but they reminded him that since they had probable cause, they didn't need a warrant, and he was forced to let them in. The fact that Mrs. Mayer was quickly trying to button her blouse did not go unnoticed by the officers. Plus, they were both wearing body cameras that were recording at the time. They called for backup and cars to take some prisoners to the county jail, which, as is often the case in most small American cities, was part of the City Hall complex that formed the center of local government for the city and surrounding county, and right next door to the mayor's office. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning when Rob got the call he had both dreaded and expected. Mr. Mayor, this is Chief Draper. We conducted a successful raid on Harvey's Tavern. As you and I suspected, he was trying to circumvent the governor's lockdown order. However, there is a potential complication. Your wife was there, and she was clearly not on her best behavior. I won't put it more harshly. But the two officers who conducted the raid were quite uncomfortable with her actions, let me tell you. Do you want me to let her go? Rob sighed. No, Tony. No, Tony. I want you to treat her the same way you've treated everyone else you've taken in. She doesn't deserve any special treatment even, or maybe especially, because she's my wife. The next morning, Mayor Rob Mason, flanked by Police Chief Tony Draper and City Manager Andrea Hall, who kept a social distance, held a press conference via social media. Members of the press, you may already know that early this morning officers from the Blandings Crossings Police Department arrested a group of people at the premises of Harvey Clinker's Harvey's Tavern on Cook Street. You may not know that my wife was one of those arrested there. Let me just say that my wife is a grown, mature woman and she knew the legal ramifications of what she was doing. Along with the other people in that room, she and they knowingly and willfully broke the law. This law was not passed to stop people from having fun, but to keep people safe from the coronavirus. There are people in our community and across the country, and indeed around the world, who are particularly vulnerable to the effects of this virus. They are the elderly with lung diseases such as asthma, diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease, who are put at risk by thoughtless and careless people like the visitors to Harvey's Tavern. They and my wife now face stiff fines and long prison sentences. It's too bad, but they were all adults and know that actions have consequences. Mayor Mason, are you going to divorce your wife? Dave Peters, editor, chief reporter, typesetter, and advertising sales manager of the city's only surviving newspaper, The Weekly Reporter, asked. Rob shrugged enigmatically. It's like I said, Dave. Actions have consequences. Of the 20 people who'd been to the tavern, 16, including the mayor's wife, had tested positive for COVID-19, and it had been decided to take them on bail and put them in the old Harvey's Tavern hotel rooms since their families had given up on the idea of letting them in. They cleaned up the rooms as best they could, and the Red Cross donated blankets and bedding to put on the moldy and lumpy mattresses that had been left in the rooms for the past 25 years. Clarissa begged her husband to allow her to return home. Rob refused, saying, I don't have the virus and you do. I don't want that, so you have to stay and live with your lover and his cronies. But I want to go home, she sobbed. That's too bad, Clarissa, because as I told you before, actions have consequences. The divorce papers would be filed as soon as his lawyer could arrange it. There was no rush. After all, it wasn't like he didn't know where she was right now.